Welcome back to my channel and welcome to the 2024 MA Nights Book Awards. It's Christmas Eve as I'm recording this, which seems like a good time of the year to look back over what I've read. And to be honest with you, it's not been a fantastic reading year for me, certainly not compared to the last couple of years. But that being said, I read 67 books, roughly, and that is the most I've read probably ever in a single year. So it's a bit of a shame that not many of them have really stuck in my head that well. But awards must still be given out, so we're going to go through my best, my worst, and a bunch of other categories as well. And let's start with the negative, why don't we, with my worst 3 books of the year. These are in no particular order, but we're going to start with Treacle Walker. This is the first book I've read by this author, and it wasn't for me. Maybe it would have helped if I'd read other books of theirs first, but to me, it read as literature with a capital L, meaning that it was obscure to the point of ridiculousness, and you kind of feel like you would need a degree in English just to be able to work out what was going on. And I'm probably wrong about this. I'm probably wrong. I accept that. But to me, I couldn't tell what was going on half the time. And I don't enjoy feeling that way. I'm the same with poetry. If I don't understand what you're talking about and I have to do too much work to uncover what you're talking about, I don't see the point. There also seems to be a theme with a lot of books in that if you're looking back at your childhood, particularly if you grew up in, say, the 50s or 60s, talking about that and looking back at that automatically makes it good literature. Maybe it's an age thing. Maybe if I was of that age, it would appeal to me more. But as it is, I just found it to be a little bit self-indulgent. And maybe that's the whole point. Maybe the book just isn't speaking to me because I'm not the right audience for it. That could be true. Let me know if you read this and enjoyed it. Next, my worst books of the year is Secrets Evergreen. I actually had an arc of this, I think, in audiobook format from NetGalley. And it's fine so far as it goes. And I don't want anything that it's truly terrible because it's not. But it was just very much for me YA by numbers. And the worst thing about it was that it kind of finished just as it was getting going. You've got a young heroine about to come of age. She's lost much of her family and her history, and she starts to stumble into some kind of plot or mystery. And it all just felt a little bit like I've read this before and I've read this better. But as I say, the worst thing about it was that the novel finished kind of at the point of rising action, where finally they got to a point where something interesting might happen, and then that was it. And clearly that was done to make you want to buy book 2, but it just felt a little bit too much of a cliffhanger for me. There wasn't enough in the initial book for me to be bothered with thinking about reading the second. And my third worst book of the year is Fractal Noise, Christopher Paolini. This is unfair. I'll say that straight off. I'm being unfair here because I thoroughly enjoyed this book right up until the ending. And the ending drove me nuts. I'm going to try and do this non-spoilery, so it's a little bit hard to talk about, but let's just say that I found the ending so unsatisfying that it put me off the entire book. It was maddening, and I can see why he did what he did. It makes sense why he did what he did with the ending, but it was just so frustrating because the whole book is building up to something. And then I just the reveal or what happened at the end was so disappointing. Not even disappointing, there was nothing happened. That was the problem. It could be a personal thing. Other people might have found it a more satisfying ending, and it's a shame because if it wasn't for that, I would probably be raving about the book because I really enjoyed it up till that point. This is sci-fi from Christopher Paolini. Obviously, he's best known for the Aragon books, but this is set in the same universe as To Sleep in a Sea of Stars, which was one of my favorite books from a year or two ago. So I was just so disappointed that this one left me with such a bitter aftertaste because I'd grown to love this world that it's set in. Not that you would really know that it's even set in the same world, to be honest. And I'm left kind of hoping that he does more set in that world because I don't want that to be my final experience of it. Okay, that is enough negativity for now. Let's move on to my top 5 books of the year. A little bit of positivity. And again, I'm not going to do these in any particular order because, as I said at the beginning of the video, it's not been a great reading year for me. And by that, I mean that none of these books have stood out really strongly for me, like in the best category and the worst category, to be honest. Nothing's kind of left me with very strong feelings. It's all been a bit meh. With that being said, of the ones that I've read this year, these are my favourites. And the first of those is Howl's Moving Castle. This obviously is a book that's had a quite famous film made of it. The film and the book are very different. I've been a fan of the film for a few years now. And I've been wanting to read the book because I wanted to see what the differences were and whether I would like it as much, etc., etc. I'd actually read some Diane Wynne Jones last year for the first time, and was really surprised at how much I loved it. So that made me even more kind of eager to read this. And within the first few pages, I knew that I was not going to be disappointed. I absolutely love this. It is different from the film, if you're familiar with that. But I think in all the best ways. This is very much to me sort of classic fairy tale fantasy, as opposed to like Lord of the Rings classic fantasy, because this is kind of written in that same fairy tale style, and obviously this is also a book for kids, so you have to take that into account as well in the way it's written. And often I find that off-putting. I find them too simplistic, but it worked in its favour for this series, I think. If you're not familiar with the story, it features a girl called Sophie who works in her family hat shop. She gets on the wrong side of the Witch of the Wastes, who transforms her into an old woman. She then kind of goes on a sort of a journey of self-discovery in which she finds and befriends a group of unlikely people, including Howl, the wizard Howl, who is supposed to be this kind of rakish, womanizing, dangerous character. And in parts he is, but he's also kind of this selfish, spoiled brat. And yet somehow you still love him, and you love the relationship that develops between them and the many other fun characters as well. And I think it's the fun that the author was clearly having writing this book that kind of stands out the most. That's what I really liked about it. It made me laugh, it made me giggle. And I have now since read the second book in the trilogy, and I'm looking forward to reading the third as well. Next up, we have a more recent release, and actually a recent read for me too. It's One Dark Window by Rachel Gillig. I'd heard nothing but great things about this going in, which can often be a bad sign for me because things can get overhyped and then you're inevitably left disappointed. But that wasn't the case for this book. I thoroughly enjoyed it. This is, again, a kind of classic fairy tale fantasy world. It's a lot darker than the previous book. But it's still that kind of classic fairy tale kingdom setting, if you like. Again, we've got a young female protagonist, but this time she has been cursed with an illness as a child, which left her with magic, which has kind of been forbidden in the kingdom where she lives. And theoretically, she should have been executed, but her family kept it a secret. And it kind of is then having consequences in her later life because she now has a monster living in her head. It's a fascinating kind of gothic fantasy world. There's a really cool magic system based around tarot cards. And there's lots of other kind of fun characters as well. I don't want to say too much more because I don't want to give anything away, but there's a bit of romance in there. If you've heard about it before, if you've heard other people talking about it, it is as good as they say. That's pretty much all I can say about it. It also ended in a way that has me now clamoring to buy book 2. The next 2 books are actually by the same author. And this is an author that I've been enjoying more and more of in the last couple of years. And I've got Thornhedge, which I have in hardback copy, and also Swordheart, which I listened to the audiobook of. I've actually read a fair bit of T. Kingfisher this year, and it was kind of hard to pick, actually, which 2 were my favourite. I've gone for Thornhedge and Swordheart because they kind of represent the 2 different sides to her fantasy writing. Thornhedge is very dark. It's classic fairy tale style fantasy again, but it's quite dark and can be violent and that kind of thing, whereas Swordheart is more romantasy, which is kind of where I got my start with T. Kingfisher, and I love it just as much, but it is a bit different. Fawnhedge is actually a retelling of the Sleeping Beauty myth, but Sleeping Beauty is not the focus. Instead, the focus is on Toadling, who is a young girl, maybe. I'm not sure if you call her a girl, maybe creature. Basically, she was taken as a child, as a baby, from her human parents and taken into the fairy realm, which has kind of changed her physiology. But anyway, once she grows up a little bit, she is sent back to the human world with one purpose: to offer a blessing of protection to a newborn girl. Simple, right? Well, things don't quite go to plan. And then the rest of the story is kind of the fallout of that. It's a fascinating book. It's written so well, and T. Kingfisher's characters are always so good. There's kind of two main characters in this, and their relationship is just fantastic. Sword Heart, on the other hand, is very much a romantasy and more of a kind of modern fantasy setting. She's actually got quite a few books in that world now. The ones I read first were the Paladin series of romantasy books, which I absolutely fell in love with. And this is that same world. I think actually this one came first, but I'd missed it for some reason. I didn't realize it was part of the same universe. And it is very much kind of the same setup, really. Boy meets girl, but I fall in love with T. Kingfisher's characters every time. This one features a girl who is being forced into marriage against her will, and she happens to come across and draw a magical sword, which has a magical protector inside it. This man then sets about freeing her from her troubles, and they go on the run, and they get to know each other, and we soon learn that everything isn't maybe quite as it seems with this man. I would describe it as cozy fantasy. It does have some stakes, obviously, but it's quite slow-paced in a way, and very much kind of the focus is on the characters, and I really, really enjoyed it. Okay, so my final book of the top 5 for 2024 is The Will of the Many. You've probably seen a lot about this book. I went in thinking that I would probably enjoy it, but probably not as much as other people have been raving about it. I often don't enjoy kind of this more style of epic fantasy as much as other things. It's based in a kind of Roman Empire or type world. It's kind of based on a pyramid, this empire, and people at the bottom cede their will to those higher up, and then people at the top have the will of a lot of people. The will kind of being like their life force. So people in the higher echelons have incredible strength and kind of agile minds and all this sort of thing, whereas those at the bottom are kind of drab and downtrodden. We follow a man who is a member of a royal family that has been deposed and murdered by this empire. He is on the run and in disguise, and as the story progresses, it kind of turns into almost like a spy thriller as he goes undercover at like a special academy of this empire. And I think that's what I liked about the book. It's kind of equal parts epic fantasy and spy thriller, and it works really, really well. And the more you learn about the world and how it works, the more you want to keep learning. And then the ending is so good because it makes you want book 2 real bad. And I am looking very much forward to reading that in 2025. Okay, moving on to my next award, which is for the most forgettable book of 2024. And this award goes to Dark Woods, Deep Water. I'm pretty sure when I read this, or I think this was an audio listen actually, but when I read it, I'm pretty sure I liked it quite a bit. But now I can't remember a single thing about it. Even after kind of having a quick look at what it was supposed to be about, I still don't really remember anything. Basically, I think there's 3 or 4 different characters that you follow, and their journeys all take them to this dark castle in the woods, where everything kind of joins together. But that is all I remember. I honestly can't remember a thing. That is frustrating because I'm pretty sure I enjoyed it, but I don't know. It's probably unfair, really, to give this award out to any book because it's probably a failing of me rather than the book itself, but I don't know. Anyone else read it? Do you remember what happened? My next award is for Most Surprising Book of 2024, and I'm giving that to The House of Open Wounds by Adrian Tchaikovsky. This is the second book in this series, and the first series by Adrian Tchaikovsky that I've read. I read the first book last year, and I absolutely loved it, raved about it. And so I went into this second book expecting to like it. But what I didn't expect was what he did with it, which it's set in a field hospital in a brutal war, right? And he does not shy away from injury details, gore, etc. That's all in there. The first book in this series was fairly grim dark, quite bleak in many ways. And I expected the same from the second book, and it is that in many ways. As I say, it's set in this field hospital, and you see a lot of bleak things, and you follow a lot of characters who are stuck doing things they don't want to do. There's not a lot of light there, and yet somehow this book was cozy. I don't know how he did that. I can't marry those two things up in my head at all. And yet, there's no denying this book was cozy. I think it's got something to do with the kind of found family in this book, which is quite strong. Much more so than in the first book. The first book, you kind of felt like everyone was out to get everyone else. They were all kind of in it for their own selfish needs. And there's certainly some of that in this second book for sure. But it felt different. So I don't know how he did it. I'd love to know how he did it. I've now read the third book in the series as well and thoroughly enjoyed that also, but it was more like the first. So the second one was a bit of an aberration maybe, but I loved it. My final book award for 2024 is going to go to Author of the Year, and I've actually picked two authors. I couldn't choose between them. And basically these are the authors that have kind of impacted my reading the most in 2024. They gave me the best time this year, and therefore they're going to get this award. And it's Jodie Taylor and T. Kingfisher. T. Kingfisher, I've obviously already talked about. I have been absolutely loving her work the last couple of years. She never seems to put a foot wrong. Everything I read of hers, I love. I found it really difficult picking the ones that I did for my best books, because I could have probably just done 5 of hers, but I wanted to limit it to just the 2. I just love everything she writes. I love her characters. I love the relationships between them. I love the way she sets up her worlds. I just love it all. I love all the horror elements in her work as well. She does this mix of cozy and horror, which is very, very much my bag. And as for Jodie Taylor, she is here because I listened to at least 11 of her audiobooks over this summer in the Chronicles of St. Mary's series. If you're not familiar with the series, basically St. Mary's is an institute of historians who zip up and down the timeline investigating historical events. Of course, causing disaster wherever they go. If something can go wrong, it will go wrong. It's very British. You learn to love the characters over the course of the series. I think if I had one criticism, it's that the stories kind of don't read as novels to me. And I think it helped that I just listened to them all back to back. It just became this one kind of solid thing, because each novel is kind of really split up into short stories or little novellas in each one, because they kind of, they'll go and visit one history period or one particular historical event and then investigate that, and there'll be a story around it and stuff. And then they'll do the next one and the next one. And although there are sometimes links, it's quite episodic in a way. It'll make a fantastic sci-fi TV show. And that's probably why none of those books actually ended up on my top 5, because it's hard to kind of recommend a particular book. But I can recommend the series as a whole. You learn to love the characters and their evolving relationships and stuff. And I can't wait to kind of continue on as she continues trying them. She also has a spin-off series, which I really want to get to in 2025. So that is my reading year for 2024. As I say, not the best reading year for me. I'm hoping for better things in 2025. I'm hoping that I'll read some books that will kind of get me more revved up. But how about you? What did you read? What were your favourite? What were your least favourite? Let me know in the comments, and I will see you in the next chapter.